For roughly 2 decades, the Empire devoted a significant number of its resources to completing the Death Star project, one that would ultimately arm the Empire with a battle station that had enough power to destroy a planet. The push to complete the Death Star came from many within the ranks of the Empire, such as Tarkin and Krennic, who saw the battle station as an opportunity to permanently end any and all dissension from Imperial rule. The demand to complete the Death Star also came from the Emperor himself, who saw its completion as a necessary component to his future plans. Clearly then, the destruction of the Death Star at the Battle of Yavin was a devastating blow to the Empire and to the Emperor himself. But the Emperor was aware of warnings from 2 of the most important individuals within the Imperial ranks, who considered the Death Star to be a foolish and useless endeavor, warnings that the Emperor chose to ignore. These 2 individuals were none other than Darth Vader and Grand Admiral Thrawn. In this video expose, I will describe why Vader and Thrawn were against the Death Star program, and why Palpatine chose to ignore their apprehensions to creating the battle station for use by the Empire. Grand Admiral Thrawn was against the Death Star from the start. Although Thrawn wasn't formally brought into the Empire's secret project, and therefore didn't know the exact dimensions or capabilities of the Death Star, his genius allowed him to recognize that shipments of dunium, the metal used in the construction of warships, hyperdrive components, sublight engine components, and Wookiee slave labor, all pointed to the construction of an enormous battle station, the likes of which hadn't been seen before. In speaking privately to his friend and aide, Commander Vanto, Thrawn admitted that he had a considerable amount of fearful apprehension that the Empire would be diverting its resources to only a single battle station. Thrawn considered the push for building larger and larger weapons as a syndrome, one that causes people to foolishly believe that larger is the equivalent of better. Therefore, even though Thrawn only had a limited knowledge of the exact specifications of the Death Star, he was firmly against it, and saw it as a misallocation of resources, believing instead that a fleet of capital ships and a large number of starfighters was the most efficient naval configuration to achieve both deterrence and success in combat. Thrawn had the opportunity to bring these concerns directly to the Emperor himself on Coruscant, when the Emperor bestowed the rank of Grand Admiral upon him. In a private conversation with the Emperor, having tried to obtain more information regarding the Death Star, Thrawn directly warned him against diverting so much of the Empire's resources into a massive project that could only bring Imperial influence to bear against one system at a time. Thrawn confidently told the Emperor that the Imperial Navy should consist of a flexible combination of capital ships and starfighters. Importantly, having heard the warnings from the Grand Admiral, who he clearly respected as a military and tactical genius, given his quick ascension through the ranks of the Imperial Navy, the Emperor chose to ignore Thrawn's advice, and told him that once the Death Star was fully operational, its very existence and presence would suppress all those who opposed the Empire, and therefore, he need not worry about Imperial resources. But it wasn't just Grand Admiral Thrawn who was against the Death Star program. The Emperor's own apprentice, Darth Vader, also shared the same sentiments. Unlike Thrawn, who was against the Death Star for tactical reasons, Vader was against the superweapon because he saw that it directly contributed to the stirring of political ambitions and aspirations amongst those within the Imperial ranks. Vader saw these individuals as unworthy of the power that was represented by the Death Star. This was due to the fact that true power was only arrived at through sacrifice and devotion, something that Vader had gone to great lengths to achieve given all he had suffered. Vader had little respect or even interest in the Death Star, and came to resent those who sought to fulfill their political ambitions through the technological terror. The power struggle between Tarkin and Krennic is a perfect representation of Vader's biggest concerns with the battle station, as Krennic tried to use the Death Star as a means of gaining favor within the Imperial court, and even gain direct access to the Emperor and the influence that it would bring. Nonetheless, Vader carried out the Emperor's orders and worked to ensure that the superweapon was secure and completed on time. Given the negative stances that both of these individuals had, one a high-ranking officer and tactical and military genius within the Imperial Navy, and the other his own Sith apprentice, why didn't the Emperor take them into consideration and come to view the Death Star as a flawed strategy on the part of the Empire? By the time of Thrawn's rise, and certainly by the time of Rogue One and the last days of the Tarkin Krennic Game of Wits, it was too late to completely change course away from the Death Star project. But one has to question why the Emperor didn't come to recognize the poor strategy that the battle station came to represent, and which was ultimately borne out at the Battle of Yavin. To understand why the Emperor came to ignore and dismiss the warnings represented through Thrawn and Vader, we must look at the reasons for why the Emperor pushed for the completion of the Death Star. One may take the Emperor's statement to Thrawn that the Death Star would ensure that all opposition to the Empire would be suppressed, as meaning that the Emperor was merely trying to crush any rebellious activity within the galaxy, and ensure his new order was protected against any outside threat before it even formed. But the Emperor's reasoning is so much more than that. Early in Palpatine's rule, he was deeply aware of his former master Darth Plagueis' warning that the Force can strike back. Not only was the Emperor attuned to the warnings of Plagueis as a matter of philosophy, he recognized evidence of the ability of the Force to strike back, even once the Jedi had been defeated and the Empire rose to replace the Republic. Even within his own apprentice Vader, he recognized the slightest amount of light that still persisted within him, and which could be a threat to him in the future. Therefore, the Emperor's chief motivation and goal was to ensure that the warning of Plagueis never came to fruition, and the Force would have no ability to strike back at him. The Death Star was of tantamount and primary importance to this ambition. Rebellious uprisings across the galaxy were not just potential threats to the existence of the Empire. More importantly for the Emperor, they were distractions that required his attention, and which pulled him away from his greater and more important efforts, his ultimate goal, of ensuring that the Force could never strike back at him, by putting out the faint light of hope that continued to persist within the galaxy. To achieve this, what the Emperor needed more than anything was time, and to end the never-ending run of distractions that appeared in the form of rebellious activity against the Empire. With the existence of the Death Star, the Emperor wouldn't need to intervene personally in the suppression of these minor threats and distractions. Rather, they could be dealt with by the Death Star and the Imperial Navy, or even better, these threats wouldn't even rise to begin with. Having ended the need for his direct intervention in these distractions, the Emperor could turn his attention to his ultimate goal of learning the final secrets of the dark side with his apprentice Vader, harnessing its true and full power to prevent the Force from striking back at him, and then ruling the galaxy for 10,000 years. With this being the ultimate goal of the Emperor, he was unconcerned about the tactical and political concerns brought to him through Vader and Thrawn, for his strategy with the Death Star was out of their comprehension, and would afford him the ability to harness the full power of the dark side. So there we have it, why the Emperor ignored the tactical and political warnings held by Thrawn and Vader regarding the Death Star. We love making these videos, so why not subscribe for more fun Star Wars theories and discussions? Also, if you enjoyed the video, think about giving a like or leaving a comment. If not for me, for aspiration.